Hey, space fans, on this episode of This Week in Space, we're talking to Dr. Rick Jenet about the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs and the National Space Society's role as an observer. Join us.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
This is This Week in Space, episode number 171, recorded on August 1st, 2025. What's an UNOOSA? Hello and welcome to another episode of This Week in Space, the What's a UNOOSA edition. Figure that one out. You have to see it in text to understand it. I'm Rod Pyle, editor-in-chief, Badass Magazine. It is my treat today to be joined by that icon of YouTube, the greatest, Isaac Arthur, also president of the National Space Society, and probably has a lot of other titles after his name. How are you doing, Isaac?
Doing pretty good. I think the only one that comes is chairman of the Board of Elections for Ohio.
But yeah, that's the one I was trying to remember.
Strange one, yeah.
There's too many words at my age, so but that's impressive.
We have an acronym for it, like everything else, like UNOOSA, COPUOUS. So
what's your acronym?
It was out later. Yeah. Oh, BOE, ACBOE. So.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Today we'll be joined in a few minutes by Dr. Rick Jenet, who is the founder, executive director of Expanding Frontiers, which is doing good works down in Brownsville, Texas. He's also director of the National Space Society and the chair of its international committee, and the vice president of the Technology and Science Advisory Board. I think that's the name. And who oversees the National Space Society status with the United Nations as an observer. So he's got a full portfolio. There's more to that, but we'll leave it there for now because we'll have him on in just a few minutes. Now, before we start, don't forget, as I tell you every week, and have you done it yet, to do us a solid, make sure to like, subscribe, and the other podcast things that will keep us happy and on the air. We are counting on you. And I do read the comments, actually, and even the ones that are less pleasant, but there's only been a couple of those, so I'm very happy about that. And now, a space joke from friend of the show, Mark Turner. Hey, Isaac.
Hey, Rod.
Why can't you trust the moon?
Why can't you trust the moon?
Because it has a dark side. Wah. And actually, they call it the dark side of the moon. Mm-hmm. It's just dark when it's dark. It's got a day-night cycle, but that's okay.
I get using that sometimes. Say it's dark relative to Earth and Earth signals.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I've heard that some people want to send us to the dark side of the moon as joke time in this show, but you can help by sending your best, worst, or most indifferent space joke to us at twit@twit.tv. And I got a whole catch of them a while ago, largely from Mark Turner and a handful of others. And I appreciate that because, well, frankly, they're better than mine. All right. And now we're going to go on to an abbreviated headline news.
Headline news.
Okay. In my defense, when you said abbreviated, I was thinking of the sound effect.
Good morning, John. Okay. So let's just do one story this time, one that's near and dear to all of us. Who owns Discovery? So the big, beautiful bill had $85 million included for moving the Space Shuttle Discovery to Houston from the Udvar-Hazy Center in D.C., where it is under the control of the Smithsonian. There's a couple of problems with that. $85 million does not appear to be enough to actually make the move. On average, it costs a couple $100 million to build a facility to house a shuttle, unless you're just going to put it in a big inflatable tent, which is an icky way to display it. LA, for instance, Los Angeles, where I live, is displaying their shuttle in vertical launch configuration in a big building, and that was a couple $100 million. So there's a few bugs there, but a bigger bug is that the Smithsonian said, no, this is a heist. This is our space shuttle. We have the paperwork to prove that NASA gave it to us. And I quote, NASA has transferred all rights, title, and interest and ownership of Discovery to the Smithsonian in 2012, and that is part of the National Air and Space Museum's mission and core function as a research facility and the repository of the National Air and Space Collection. And technically, just about anything comes back from space and lands on Earth belongs to the Smithsonian if NASA made it or NASA paid for it through contractors. Mm-hmm. So it's a weird story because Texas isn't giving up, and this is something that the senators of Texas have been beating the drum on for years. They feel they should have a shuttle. I would just like to say, as I said a couple weeks ago, they do have a shuttle. It was a mate-demate mock-up. It's sitting out in front of the Space Center Houston, which is right across the street from Johnson Space Center. on the back of one of two shuttle carrier planes. They're the only museum I know of that has a shuttle carrier plane. So you've got a shuttle, and people can actually go inside that one. So why, oh, why, Isaac, I asked you, should Houston spend all this money and deprive DC of their shuttle?
You're right. It should obviously be at the Wright-Patterson Air Force Museum here in Ohio, in Dayton, which is vastly more worthy of a shuttle.
Said like a true politician.
But I mean, it's a fair point to raise. Is obviously whatever the Smithsonian has can be moved to other locations, but if it's set up to basically anything coming from NASA belongs to the Smithsonian, there's an awful lot of states, an awful lot of groups, an awful lot of other places that might want some of that heritage too. So not saying Texas necessarily has an inside track to be able to get this, or, maybe if they're willing to put up the rest of the money, they can get it. But at the same time, I don't think we're going to have everything stored in the Smithsonian. And, I can sympathize their perspective. They are the country's museum, but there's a lot of the country and a lot of museums.
Just drive there.
What? Well, DC is closer to me than Texas is, but...
Well, there you go. I mean, how long can it take you to load the kids in the car?
Closer to everybody.
Yeah, but it's an Air Force base. And that's an interesting discussion. So, for instance, we have Jet Propulsion Laboratory about 6 miles north of me. It's the only major NASA field center without a museum because there's no real estate there. It's nestled in a crook in the foothills above Pasadena. And there is a hoity-toity equestrian center and a sheriff training facility nearby. But without taking those over, you have no room for a visitor center. So you can only go like 1 or 2 days a year to go visit JPL, which is a shame because it's a really cool place. How would an Air Force base have a visitor center? Is that something they could accommodate?
Well, the museum at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, the aerospace museum there is huge. They get, God, thousands and thousands of visitors. I used to go down there for my lunch break, so I was an intern back in 2000. But walked up the hill at the actual Air Force Institute. Huge museum, gorgeous. If you haven't been there, go there, all shuttles aside. But I think just in that kind of context, I hate to say we should be auctioning off, but there's a lot to be said about asking states, what kind of visitor center are you willing to provide? What kind of matching funds are you willing to offer to get this piece of American history at your location so it's close to other people to go look at and present it best? And might be a thing worth thinking about there. But, again, if you haven't checked out the museum, absolutely, it's great.
Well, that's the best commercial I've ever heard for Wright-Patterson. So well done.
Go Ohio.
Oh, boy. We will be right back in just a few seconds with Dr. Rick Jenet to talk about the National Space Society and the United Nations. Stay with us. And we are back with Dr. Rick Jenet, who is the founder and executive director of Expanding Frontiers, on the board of directors of the National Space Society, and the chair of its international committee, and the vice president of, what's the name of that?
Technology and Entrepreneurship.
Technology and Entrepreneurship. So you wear about 19 hats for us, which we appreciate. And it's Pirates Day here because we have you and Isaac Arthur, as previously introduced, who's the president of the National Space Society. So I'm actually the only one that doesn't have an officer's title. So I'm the small dog here today.
I'm sure the director of communications.
Well, that's true, but yeah. Okay, sure. But Rick, I have a quote here that I want to read. I was trying to think of ways to introduce you, but Walt Ugalde on LinkedIn did a better job than I could do, which is to say, Dr. Rick Jenet is a rare combination of integrity, ambition, and intelligence. And I will just add to that after I saw you at the ISDC take the podium, you're also funny as hell. So welcome to the show.
Well, you're making it very difficult for me to live up to that, but thank you very much. Thanks, Rod. It's great to be here.
People laughed at your jokes, probably because they were at my expense, but that's okay. I thought it was a lot of fun. So we're here today to talk about the connection between and the work being done by the National Space Society in conjunction with the United Nations, which is something you took on about 2 years ago, I think, right?
I guess as vice chair 2 years ago, but had been on the committee for at least a year and a half, 2 years before that as well.
Okay, so I guess what I would be interested to know is how this connection came about and what it is, and then we could talk about UNOOSA and COPUOUS.
Sure. So, the real connection between NSS and the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs and the UN in general happened 24 years ago or so in 2001, when visionaries at the NSS saw an opportunity to become a permanent observer at the UN, which enables them to actually be part of this global conversation. So I'm only coming into this whole thing, obviously, in the last few years now. But it's been it was great to see, and it was actually one of the reasons why I joined NSS is that I saw that they had this global influence and an ability to have a fantastic global influence, and so that's that's kind of where we were. And then quick shout out to the CEO Carlton Johnson, and his leadership is setting the tone, and he and the other NSS leaders have trusted me to really kind of run with the international committee and build up NSS's global reach. So it's been a pretty exciting journey.
So and I remember Alfred Anzaldúa was also involved with that for a while.
Of course, and thank you I would be remiss not to mention Al. Al was a mentor of mine as I joined the international committee. He kind of showed me the ropes on the floor at the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space and the UN in Vienna as well. So Al was great to work with. It is great to work.
And how handy to have a guy who spent 25 years in the State Department when you're dealing with such things. Isaac.
Yep. So for folks who might not be as familiar, we just said with the acronyms here were COPUOUS and UNOOSA, the UN Office of Outer Space Affairs. Can you tell us a little bit more about those actually are, what they serve, and what their main goal is?
Certainly. So these entities were created in the 60s. So UNOOSA, the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs, it was basically the directorate that would run the Committee on Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. So they're the ones that provide the service that basically organizes that entire that group and brings together what is now the 104 member state delegations that come and meet 3 times a year. UNOOSA is also, I like to look at it as COPUOUS is kind of like the Congress, and UNOOSA is kind of like the executive branch. So COPUOUS, that's the member delegations. They're the people that are setting, what's going to happen, what should happen, the principles, the laws in some cases early on. And it's UNOOSA that kind of carries out and makes sure that things are being carried out. So when you register, I guess few people. It's great to educate people about the role of these 2 organizations, because they do have an influence and a growing influence in space development now, as space development is ramping up. And any member state that launches is required to actually register the objects with the UN Office of Outer Space Affairs. So they keep a registry of everything that is up there internationally. And of course, COPUOUS is the body that is basically thinking about legal frameworks, and in some cases, like the Outer Space Treaty, developing what will become actual laws, international laws. So very important now as commercial space activity grows, as more state actors start having a space program, more coordination is necessary. And so more and more member states are joining these discussions. More and more observers are joining these discussions.
So I think when most of us think of the UN, we think of the big hall and some angry delegation getting up to the podium and slamming the heel of their shoe on the podium, saying, "I don't like this proposal, and we're going to do that. We will never vote for this." And having observer status is a little different than that. So how does that work?
So first off, having observer status is a privilege. We're allowed to be there because the member states allow us to be there. And it is something that, we take seriously, and NSS takes seriously, as we want to be a resource for the delegates. So there are definitely there are observers that will go up there and slam their hand on the table and say, you need to be doing this, you need to be doing that, all that kind of stuff, which is fine. That sort of has its place. But we feel we want to take let's listen to what the member states are saying. Let's talk to them, have a dialogue with them to understand what where are gaps in the knowledge? Where are things that they're trying to understand and wrestle with, so that we can then produce the research, the papers, the presentations that can inform them, so that they can take that back to their countries. They can use that as they develop the guiding principles.
On the topic of the principles, they'd say you got the laws, you got the treaties, you got the policy versus the legal framework. For things like policy or principles, some would argue, like, what's the actual purpose there? What's the point that gets to, as opposed to a treaty?
Oh, that's an excellent point. Matter of fact, in our last international committee meeting, we had a very good discussion kind of around this. And one of our youngest members, who's actually comes to us from Nairobi in Africa, Cynthia Shahemi. She asked that similar question, like, why do we do this? Why do we write down principles? Why do we do this kinds of stuff? And so we're thinking about it and so forth. And you look at history and you think, well, what was the Magna Carta? And what was the Declaration of Independence? There's a bunch of people that got together and wrote down how they feel things should go. Now, depending upon how it's presented, where it's presented, and so forth, some may stick, some may not. But it all has to start. You got to start somewhere, and you have to start putting these thoughts down in paper, and you have to start reviewing it, and you start building momentum around it, and so forth. So that's really what the value of these principles are. Is let's start having this conversation. Let's start putting words down. Let's start everyone thinking about it and so forth. And it's the first step towards developing, best practices, and then ultimately moving on to, real codified treaties and laws.
All right. Well, we're going to consider our next treaty after this short break, so don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. So you kind of touched on this, but when you're talking about the specific roles these offices and the UN more broadly in space, I guess the big discussion is policy and legal frameworks. And as you noted to me, principles, not laws. So I'm sure some people ask, what's the point? But first, I think we need to understand exactly how it works. Well, maybe not exactly. I mean, broadly, how it works.
Well, sure. When we say how it works, it's an interesting. So what happens, and this is one of the great things about being a fly on the wall there, is there will be a group that proposes some set of principles, and then it kind of goes through the entire process, which that in of itself is pretty amazing to watch. So what happens after things are presented is that literally everyone has conversations about it. Like you'll have on the margins conversations about it, where different groups are now going to talk about it and so forth. And then you have where people become the avatars of their country, as I like to put it. So in other words, it's the official discussion where everything's translated, which that in of itself is an amazing experience, by the way. It's just like, wow, everyone is speaking in their natural language and I understand everything. It's like, this is amazing. But what has to happen now is they will literally put up like, okay, we think this is the way we think this should be worded. And that gets put up on a screen, right? And then all the delegations start to respond. And some may say, oh my God, this is like pulling teeth, because it's like they're each trying to adjust certain words and so forth and so on. But what I'm seeing is it really is, in a global sense, it's team building. Right, you see this. It's a very similar team building exercise that you do with groups of 4 or 5 people that are working at one company, and you're seeing it now happen on the global stage, where everyone puts their input. Everyone says, now in this format, they're representing their states, so they're very careful about what they say and how they say it and so forth, and you get to see various things being reflected and so forth. But eventually, they come down and they start to agree on something. So now, of course, one thing when people talk about the speed at which it works, it may take an hour to get the heading of a section figured out. But when it's figured out and agreed upon by the 104 member states that are in that room. So, okay, it's a conversation amongst the ants, but it has it is an important and far-reaching agreement that was just made, and that this is wording that could be agreed upon by groups and cultures that are speaking different languages and so forth. So that level of the sausage making is amazing to see, and I think it is. I think it is something very positive on a global scale.
So if you're discussing let's say a big space initiative of some kind, as talking about future resource rights or something, in general, does the entire membership of the UN vote on that? Does that mean that you've got, a small island republic in the Central Pacific possibly blocking something, or is it somehow skewed towards the larger space powers?
Yeah. So when it comes to COPUOUS, so the specific committee, the way this was set up is it is set up as a consensus body. And so just like what you said, in order for any action to move forward, it does have to be a unanimous vote. So effectively, everyone has veto power. So you're right. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter. It's not based on size or anything like that. Every delegation has equal authority to say, no, I don't agree with that. So yeah, and that's just that is the reality of that. But it also means that when they do agree on something, it is something that is agreed on by the entire membership, which is reflecting the entire voice of humanity.
I guess it would kind of fit the kind of follow-up there being, what exactly is the value of this if we have to get Abby on the table to agree? And I'm guessing that doesn't happen as often as everyone would probably like. What would you say the value to humanity as a whole is, and to the United States space program, and to other major space programs who are actually doing most of the day-to-day operations?
Right. So, well, part of that is, okay, right now it's a small number of state space actors, but we know, especially NSS's vision, is that going to space with humans living and working outer space is a global endeavor, and it does require the large talents, across many different diverse backgrounds and so forth. So, what is it doing? Well, there's things like space traffic management, right? So you need to coordinate those activities just the same way internationally we have air traffic management, and there are certain legal frameworks behind that, so that we're able to fly over, or anywhere in the world, and expect certain laws to be adhered to and so forth. So it's that same idea. It's this international coordination. Big thing that we especially here, us in the room here, we know that orbital debris, it's a big deal, right? States are launching things. Okay, what do they just stay there right now. Things break up, and those particles are all over the place. They're going to cause problems. So far, knock on wood, it hasn't. But those discussions need to happen on a global scale as to how do you coordinate all of this stuff, and who coordinates it, and those types of things. Another one, which we don't necessarily think of, but UNOOSA is thinking of this, has to do with space defense. And what do I mean by space defense? Well, okay, there's human-generated defense issues. Fine, okay, fine, we know those. But this is if, what happens if an asteroid comes by and actually looks like it's going to impact somewhere in the globe. Who deals with that? Right? And those are types of discussions, and it's the type of coordination that UNOOSA and related groups would starting to consider and would be considering. And so it's that global coordination is where the real value is. There is also space resources. How does one use space resources in a coordinated way that's aligned with the Outer Space Treaty, but enables development? So those policies are starting to be developed and thought about, and those, so that framework is starting to come together, and that's something that all interested groups that are going to want to take advantage of space resources, they're going to want to know that that's there for various reasons. So So yeah, no, it's the coordination issue. It's making it's making sure that things are being done safely. There is this idea. It is a mantra that comes up all the time. Is that space, especially in this committee, is for peaceful purposes, and I think it's very important that gets stated over and over again. That space is for peaceful purposes, and the delegates are there. They say it. They reaffirm that whole important aspect of things. So, it is this global coordination across many different aspects of space exploration and development that makes COPUOUS very unique. People hate it when I say very unique, but make it unique amongst anything that's happening in the world, and is becoming more and more relevant now. So.
I think we're going to need to circle back to that 800-pound gorilla about peaceful uses of space after this next break. So stand by. We'll be right back. So the origin of all this was the Outer Space Treaty of 1967, very old, set up initially, as I understand it, between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, but other people eventually signed it. So maybe you could talk a little bit about what it is, why it's important, and the conversation around, does it need to be updated?
Excellent. So, as with any legal framework, why it's important, it is to give some security for operations that are happening in space. It gives some reaffirming as to what the expectations are in space, and this was being done in the middle of a Cold War. We know what was kind of on our minds at the time, and kind of wanted to make sure that we all agreed, all right, this could be bad for everyone, so let's just agree on how we're going to operate in this way. And I think everyone, again, I should say, not a legal expert on this, and this is what I've gleaned over my time at COPUOUS and UN, and my friends that are way more knowledgeable of this. But the Outer Space Treaty is basically our only global treaty that is governing how state actors are going to behave. And this is where this mantra of for peaceful purposes really comes into play, and I think is extremely important, as we can all gather. But it was a document that was written in the 60s. Certain issues, important issues that are starting to be questioned about it now, has to do with what does it mean about ownership of properties. Now, it is very clearly stated that states cannot appropriate property or land on celestial bodies, right? So what exactly does that mean? You always start to pick apart things and wonder why certain things were worded and stuff, because the Earth is a celestial body, and states are appropriating land on celestial bodies. But okay, that's a legal point there, right? But it's that has been guiding how we how are we going to consider moving forward with this thought of commercial space and private space actors, and what protections can states offer to big investments that happen in space if states can't claim jurisdiction over whatever's being developed and built. And so the discussions are happening about how you deal with that and so forth. The very creative things are being thought of and whatnot. But that is an area that maybe we need to rethink. And so I think slowly on the margins, people are, it's like, what needs to be rethought here? There's always the question, though, is the geopolitical climate correct and right to do something like that? So everyone's like, well, maybe we'll just, wait right now. Maybe we'll work with what we got.
We'll kick that can down the road.
We'll kick that. Yeah, exactly.
Well, and at the time that this was done in 1967, there was kind of this increasing interest in, I guess you'd call it, direct military applications of space. There were designs in both Soviet Union and the United States for orbital weapons. We were looking at how you could arm space stations of the future, which in fact the Soviets actually did put a Gatling gun on one of their space stations as an experiment. But even before that, U.S. had launched a fission reactor into orbit in 1962, and we had the fishbowl experiments like Starfish Prime, where we just said, hey, let's see what happens if you detonate a nuclear device in orbit. How bad can it be? Oh, it's very bad for electrical systems. And there are plans on both sides of the Atlantic to detonate nuclear weapons on the moon just to show that we can and scare the Reds and vice versa. So that certainly made it a timely thing. Isaac.
So we were touching a moment on resource management for the moon and asteroids, and that's a topic that needs to get solved at some point. But again, maybe the climate's not right to make those decisions. Space traffic and space debris, though, that's very much today. What are they looking at for that right now? What sort of agreements seem to be acceptable to everyone? What kind of framework is that looking like?
Yeah, so I would say it's very much in its nascent phase right now. It is just coming to bear. So space traffic management is definitely. So I will say this is an area that I'm rather proud of, because our delegation got called out by name, the National Space Society, by one of the official member state delegations for the work that we submitted on space traffic management, which was a great thing to see, and I think important to show to our NSS membership that, yeah, we are really having an impact here. But the discussions are very much in their infancy. They're talking about how do we protect things? How do we have coordination? What type of information sharing? Those types of basic tenets that get discussed in these types of things, and that it's something that everyone should be at the table, and it should be transparent with all groups. So it's that kind of level of discussion right now. I think, but they do want to, it's one of those things that they want to get ahead of and start having discussions. So there are things in place. There are I don't know if they're official groups yet that are doing that. I think there are actually on space traffic management. So it's being discussed, but it's in its infancy, I would say.
Is that more or less the case for the more long range aspects like asteroid mining, moon mining, and ISRU for, if Artemis or some other project gets a moon base going? So
with the ISRU, there is actually a document, and you can find it online on the UNOOSA website, which are the principles for space resource utilization, which is is putting together a set of, tenets and best practices to start to guide that conversation. And it was actually an important conversation that was happening at the second subcommittee meeting, the legal subcommittee meeting that was, I think, second quarter 2025 when that happened. And it was, it was an amazing thing to see. Again, there's the peaceful purposes piece that's there. There's information sharing, which is an important part of it. The role of science and how that plays out is something that is there. In other words, are there exclusion zones that are specific for science, or how does science and the commercial activities work together? They're thinking through those aspects and so forth. But again, these are being put together as sort of non-binding, as you say, principles. That the idea is ultimately, like all of these things, these would be put, they're non-binding principles, they become best practices, then ultimately they would potentially move into what could be would consider be a global treaty or so forth. So it's a amazing time to see that, these things are seriously being discussed. Also, coordinating lunar activities. There is something called the Action Team for Lunar Activities Consultation, which I had the honor of seeing how that was being put together, and how the people that were the brains behind that maneuvered that. Fantastic work to see that happen at a global level. And now there is this action team, which as far as I can tell, all member states are participating in it. There are two co-chairs. One is from Romania. The other is from Pakistan. They represent basically Artemis and ILRS. So they're there together, having these discussions and coordinating the future of what of humanity going to the moon, what it would look like. So I think those two things are probably going to be the most important and long-lasting things that come out of COPUOUS in the near future.
All right, let's go to our last break, and we'll be right back. So you mentioned Artemis, which is the American lunar effort and the framework of agreements surrounding that. And we have, I think, somewhere in the mid-50s in terms of how many nations have signed on now. And then the ILRS, which is the International Lunar Research Station, which is effectively China and Russia in that order at this point, because Russia's budget has subtracted quite a bit over the years for space. But I'm wondering, so these are the two initiatives, between East and West to get back to the moon. We're all our eyes on to see who does this earliest, for whatever that might matter. Is that an active topic of discussion in the sessions you attend? And
they do come up.
So?
They do come up, and I think they more or less come up as delegations will say that they have, we have recently signed on to the Artemis Accords as in their what is called the General Exchange of Views, which is kind of just talking about what they've been doing. That is what their state has been doing that's aligned with the committee. And then you'll have others coming up. We have joined ILRS and that kind of stuff that is discussed. Something I will mention that recently I came to my attention was there's actually a third option. It's coming out of the Hague Institute for Global Justice, and it's called the Washington Compact, which is being led out of the institute. And the idea is that they want commercial actors and private actors to be signing on to this and be signing on to this compact, which is very much a reflection of the Outer Space Treaty and how you would move forward ethically and peacefully in developing outer space. I'm very excited to see how that moves forward in all of these discussions. So
I think that definitely can be when we look at who's doing what on the moon, who's getting ready to do stuff on the moon with the exclusion zones, you've got a lot of private actors that are looking to test products, test the new rover, test the method of oxidize, getting some oxygen out of the rock. What does that actually look like right now in terms of who owns what and what's going to be permitted for both private actors, your SpaceX and Blue Origins, and then for individual nations or groups of nations?
Well, it is an interesting. I think this is still trying to be figured out, but the main problem, the Outer Space Treaty limits you can't, no ownership. So a state can't come down, plant a flag, and say I own this square kilometer. So, but then the way you're gonna, how do you move forward in this situation? How does a private actor move forward in a situation like this? When it's just like, well, so I go there, and since the state doesn't own it, then who protects my interests and so forth? And it's just, by definition, it's the Wild West. And so the discussions are, well, how do we work around this? One workaround is this, there is something called an exclusion zone that's allowed for in the Outer Space Treaty, which is when I have something that's operating there, then you should have due regard for, coming next to it or trying to disturb the operations or the scientific research, whatever it is that member state is doing. So that's the kind of hook that people are looking at as to how you get around these issues. So the idea is, all right, well, I can put my sensor system down here, and then I say, all right, well, that's I now control that area, and it's an exclusion zone, so you shouldn't come near me, kind of thing. But how big is the exclusion zone, and how close you can get, and all of those things, I don't know if that's fully delimited, and there's a lot of leeway in there and so forth. So, I think these are exactly the types of things, the types of discussions that are happening as to what do we do with this, and that's what the action team and lunar activities consultation will do together with other other subcommittee entities in COPUOUS that are looking at space resource utilization and space sustainability and these types of things. But it's not by no means a solved problem. And how does someone make a decision that they're going to invest, or how does someone make a decision that they're going to insure a mission when none of these legal frameworks are in place to ensure anything at the moment? So, but because the technology is so close, and we're starting to recognize that UNOOSA and COPUOUS realize that these are the conversations that need to be happening now, so that we can get ahead of this.
So when I first heard observer status, and this is many, many years ago, not knowing much about it, the image that flashed in my head was, a bunch of guys sitting up in the bleachers eating popcorn while these things were debated, which is not the case. So can you talk a little bit about what influence and recent contributions we might have made?
Sure. So actually, this is a great lead in. If you go to the NSS website,
NSS.org.
NSS.org. Under About NSS, you'll see International Policy. And clicking on that brings you to our National Space Society Library of International Space Policy. And you can see all the work that we've been recently doing. I think we have everything up there that we've done in 2025. And that will be, as we'll start to get the earlier work on there as well. But we have, so the types of things, first, you'll see things called the General Exchange of Views, which is just here's who we are, here's our influence in the areas that we do, here's what we want to do, here's how we want to help the delegates. So that's we talk about those types of things. We also talk about our wonderful education programs and our workforce development programs and things like ISDC and things like this wonderful podcast, This Week in Space, and also Isaac Arthur's work as well gets talked about in there. But also we have our work on space traffic management, legal challenges, and so forth, and the benefit sharing of space development. We have you'll see work in there. Quick shout out to Grant Hendrickson, recent joiner of the policy committee. Sorry, of the International Committee, but he is the chair of the Policy Committee, and it's been great working with him as he's been helping us develop many of these concepts and ideas. We also make presentations. So we have presentations on things like deorbiting large space objects and the legal challenges that are behind those types of things. I want to give a quick shout out to Paul Wonderall, who has been leading those discussions, and he's our representative who is NSS member who's in Germany, actually. And things about NSS's opinions of dark and quiet skies and how we can have a sustainable path forward and a long-term strategy for astronomy and how they work together with commercial space. We've been touching many different topics. We had a great presentation that one of our members, Donica Vallone, who actually joined us in person in February at the Science and Technology Subcommittee, where she talked about healthcare innovations in both space and remote environments. We basically take advantage of the large amount of knowledge and information that NSS members have, work closely with our policy committee, and we present information that is relevant to the agenda items set by the member states.
So maybe you could discuss a little bit the role of these UN offices in global launch and regulation. I know we're struggling quite a bit with trying to streamline regulations here in the US, but then there's global stuff that has to be concerned. And you mentioned something to me about regulation sandbox, which sounds like a very cool idea. How does that work?
Yeah. So now I first learned of this at ISDC. One of the NSS sponsors had given a great presentation at ISDC talking about this thing called a regulation sandbox. And it is basically the idea here is that you take, say you have a technology area, or you have a particular area with a lot of commercial potential, but the regulations might not be up to promoting that particular thing, whatever it may be. So this has been, I think it's been demonstrated in Europe and different other countries, where the idea is that you kind of say, all right, this particular area, we're going to set aside the existing regulations and allow them to operate under this new set of regulations for a limited amount of time and see what happens. Right? That's basically what it is. I know of several different examples, including I believe even China has done this with special economic zones that they've created in certain cities, can have certain rules, and they can see how it goes. So the discussions basically came out of, it's like, well, can something like that work for things like global treaties and global regulations? It's an interesting thought, and I think it'll be interesting to see what may come out of that. Not even sure what one would do. Maybe we consider, it's like, well, okay, this particular patch of the moon, we're going to relax some of these regulations and just kind of see what happens for the next few years. Or maybe this island in the Pacific or something along those lines that are in international waters. We see what happens. Not sure how it would go forward, but it was a very interesting concept that you could potentially, that you could actually agree to deregulate an area for a limited amount of time and just try it out. And we can see that there are areas in space, in space launch and ISRU and so forth that might benefit from something like this. So we'll see.
Well, we mentioned laws and regulations, and earlier we were talking about how it's kind of the Wild West right now because there just is no rule for what you could do on the moon, for instance. And there's always that future vision in science fiction. You've got your Star Trek kind of semi-utopian setup, and you got something a little bit more dystopian like The Expanse. We got the asteroid miners, and then, of course, maybe a very good one for the occasion, Babylon 5, which was kind of like the UN in space. What is our preferred vision of the future? Is it Star Trek? Is it Expanse? Babylon 5? Something completely else?
So you're asking what way I see things forward, or where NSS
or the UN for that matter,
or the UN. Well, the UN's vision is what the member states make it to be, which is an interesting, it's an interesting thing, and it's this idea. Well, the UN is all about conversation. Mm-hmm. It is, let's have everyone at the table. Let's make sure that they continue to discuss things and they're there no matter what's happening in the background. And I hope that that's kind of the way things are going to move forward. I mean, I think things are going to grow organically, and I think there's going to be a little bit of each that is going on, just because that's the way. There's a reason why there is all these different views, is because we each have these different views, and it's going to start out. There'll be certain things that are tried. We'll have our initial colonies and so forth, and certain things will happen, and so we can use history as a guide that we hope we can learn from. But I do hope that moving forward, the United Nations continues to be that group. Well, or there is a group, hopefully, but the United Nations is it right now. So there is that group where these conversations continue, and then whatever settlements form as we move forward, they will have a voice as they continue to develop. And we continue to have that guide towards peaceful uses of outer space. We know human nature. We know there's going to be pitfalls and all of that kind of stuff. We know things aren't going to go rosily. Stuff's going to happen. I think we're going to be we tend to be reactionary in a lot of our laws and our legal frameworks. So things weren't, maybe will not be pushed to the forefront until something really happens to push it to the forefront. But hopefully we'll be when certain things happen, when that first, when there's that first bar fight in space, or, there's that first mugging, or there's that first something gets stolen in space. Hopefully we can, we pull out and we say, we're able to look at, it's like, all right, well, the UN COPUOUS, there were guidelines that were put in place for this. So let's see what they have to say here. And that's maybe we should move these more towards treaties and so forth. So those are my quick thoughts on that, on that very deep question.
I'd like to see a televised reality TV show bar fight inside a Crew Dragon capsule. That would be interesting because there's nowhere to go. My last question. My last question for you is, I think I understand why space enthusiasts, I mean, we all understand why space enthusiasts should care about what happens with these organizations and their offices and the involvement the NSS has, because, we're one of the public voices that's there. But for the general public, do you have a comment on how this affects them and why they ought to care?
So, well, when we say why the general public should care, is because these are discussions that are happening. They're happening at a very high level, but it's agreements ultimately going to lead to agreements that member states are going to take back, and that they're going to create laws around these particular things. Now, we're seeing an initial part of this, and it's kind of happened, and certain space actors, private space actors, have come up and said, well, I can go to this place and I don't have to worry about any laws or anything like that, right? It's like, well, no, actually, there are actually international laws that govern how you're going to behave when you do certain things. I mean, so that's basically, those are cutting edge examples. But as space development moves more into the public, as in more and more entrepreneurs are taking this on, which they are, we know they are. Small business and entrepreneurs are looking at, how do we mine asteroids? How do we utilize these resources? All of this kinds of stuff. In the background, there are these laws that are there. And I mean, there's definitely each state has their own laws that maybe they're vaguely familiar with, but they know that they're going to get hurt. They're going to get their hands slapped if suddenly they disobeyed the FAA, or suddenly something. There are particular laws that they've overreached. And same thing's going to happen on the international scale. So they need to be. You need to be abreast. You need to be aware that these things exist. And I know my legal friends will say the sooner that a startup is aware that these frameworks are there and they should know about them, the less painful it's going to be when the time comes that they're faced with them. So right now it seems a little bit abstract, but more and more it's becoming into the realm of people's on people's radars and in people's minds.
Well, this has been a treat, and I want to thank you for enlightening not just the audience, but me, because this is something I wanted to know more about as well. And I want to thank everybody, and especially you, Rick, for joining us today for episode 171, which I like to call What's a UNOOSA? Because for a long time, I didn't know. Rick, where should we set our navigation guidance systems to rendezvous with you on the internet?
So yeah, definitely. I'm the co-founder, executive director of Expanding Frontiers. So please check us out at www.expandingfrontiers.org. Also, have a look at the great work that the International Committee is doing at the NSS. So that's nss.org, and look for the international policy work.
Okay, and Isaac, where can we find you dominating the entire spectrum of YouTube?
So you can find me by just searching my name and Science and Futurism with Isaac Arthur. We have new episodes every Thursday, and usually a second episode most weeks too.
And I just have to say, I keep track of your episodes, obviously, and these are something I might be able to turn out once a year. You come up with these really deep dives in brain-hurting topics, and I got nothing but admiration for your work, because it's It's out of this world, as we like to say. And of course, you can always find me at pilebooks.com or at astromagazine.com. And not just you can find me there, go find me there. Remember to drop us a line at twis@twit.tv. That's TWIS at twit.tv. We love getting your comments, suggestions, and ideas. And now that I have Isaac on board for a week or two, I'll get him to answer a couple of them too. New episodes published every Friday on your favorite podcatcher, so make sure to subscribe, tell your friends, and give us reviews. We'll take whatever you like, but 5 stars or thumbs or whatever you got would be great. And don't forget, we're counting on you to join Club Twit this year. Besides supporting this show, which is, of course, my favorite, you'll help keep the network on the air and operating. An appreciable percentage of the operating budget for the Twit network now comes from Club Twit. So stand up and be counted. It's only $10 a month, and you get this show without ads, all shows without ads, and other special stuff you can get nowhere else. Thanks, everybody. It's been a treat. And I will see you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
No matter how much spare time you have, twit.tv has the perfect tech news format for your schedule. Stay up to date with everything happening in tech and get tech news your way with twit.tv. Start your week with This Week in Tech for an in-depth, comprehensive dive into the top stories every week. And for a midweek boost, Tech News Weekly brings you concise, quick updates with the journalists breaking the news. Whether you need just the nuts and bolts or want the full analysis, stay informed with twit.tv's perfect pairing of tech news programs.